Welcome to the Staffing Playbook podcast, your go-to resource for navigating the dynamic world of staffing and HR. I'm your host, Stephen Farrell. Join me each week as we dive deep into the strategies, insights, and stories that shape the staffing industry. From the latest trends to expert interviews and practical tips, we'll equip you with the right tools and knowledge to succeed in the staffing industry. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, the Staffing Playbook is here to help you play your best game. Let's get started.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Staffing Playbook podcast. I am your host, Steve Farrell. I am joined by no other who's become a regular on the show, Ian McLeod from Glow Up, Grow Up, not Glow Up. Maybe you have a Glow Up leadership too.
I think there probably is something. There's stuff called Glow Up out there already. That
From Glow Up Leadership, also known as Grow Up Leadership. Ian is a fantastic mentor and coach for companies and individuals. So check him out. Ian, we have a great episode today. This one is going to be jam-packed. We may even go over time. We'll try not to, but we're going to be talking about leadership strengths versus weaknesses. And I know you have a lot to share. I have a lot of questions for you. But before we get into it, how are you, man? What have you been up to?
I'm good, man. So, speaking of, man, and I will say your intro always gets me hyped and, on a Friday and everything. So I love that, the music and the just the level of energy that comes through. So speaking of podcast, there's a podcast that I particularly love and have been a huge fan of for years and years, and I'm a regular listener to, called Hidden Brain.
Hidden Brain.
Hidden Brain. It's great. It's on psychology, of course. Something that I enjoy.
It's a psychology podcast.
And
of course, I wouldn't expect anything less, Ian.
There's always a connection between oftentimes organizational psychology or psychology and how you apply that to work. A lot of these folks go on to apply what they learn to work settings. So they have a lot of great people who are also not only just behavioral scientists, but business thinkers as well. Anyways, to my surprise, so I'm currently in graduate school at University of Houston, their Bauer School of Business, which I'm enjoying.
Great school.
Yeah, I'm doing a master's in management and leadership there. Anyways, to my surprise, the guest that they had on this week is a professor. And again, when I listen to this stuff, I'm like, these are these great, kind of godlike people who I just listen to and admire, and they, share their wisdom. But there was actually one of the professors from University of Houston, Dr. Vanessa Patrick, on the show this week. So super exciting for me. I just got to extra
Why
level.
Is it so exciting to you, Ian?
Well, because it's University of Houston where I'm going to and everything like that. So I'm just, just made me proud to be a part of that community. And I think just in general, exciting to see someone who I can get to actually learn from, who's actually out there talking on this national level. So anyways,
that's really cool.
It was fun for me.
I'll have to check out that podcast. It's called Brain what?
Hidden Brain. And it's nationally syndicated. I think it's part of NPR and some other groups. You can get it on all the different podcast stuff. It's been out for a long time, but excellent listen for anyone. It's great material.
My go-to podcasts recently have been Lex Friedman, Andrew Huberman, of course, Joe Rogan. I mean, you always have to watch Joe Rogan.
Yes. he, he brings some interesting points and information for sure.
And then I've been listening to Haley Marketing, their podcast called Secrets of Staffing Success. I may have got that wrong.
Nice.
But also a fantastic podcast. Okay.
There are so many great podcasts, including the Staffing Playbook here.
And the Staffing Playbook, which I might just put it out there. It's going to be #1 on Podbean and Spotify for our space.
That's awesome.
A year from now. I'm just putting it out there in the world. It's going to be #1 on the charts.
I'm saying congratulations early because it's.
Thank you. Congratulations to you as well. All right. So we're going to be talking about leadership strengths and weaknesses. I've got this book here, Standout 2.0. It's a great book on assessing your strengths, finding your edge based on your strengths, and winning at work. And really cool book I've gone through in the workshop. I've gone through Strength Finders. I don't know which version, but I know you're very familiar with Strength Finders.
Yes.
And this is a topic that's on everybody's mind from time to time. As if you're in a leadership position or if you're a frontline employee, you really are. A lot of times, I know for me personally, I have what's called imposter syndrome. And so I'm in this role. Am I really cut out? Do I have all the knowledge and experience? And of course, I wouldn't have been hired if I didn't, but I still deep down, I go, okay, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses in this role? And often I look at my weaknesses more than my strengths. And I go, okay, maybe I need to improve over here on these weaknesses so I can just be my best self. But I want to get your perspective on why understanding both strengths and weaknesses are vital for leadership. And I want to talk about, where we should be applying our focus as leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and I think there are a lot of different focuses on and different approaches to this, but one of the ones that I really like, and you kind of pointed out, was from Strength Finders, which is actually a whole book series from Gallup. Gallup is one of the largest and kind of oldest data collection, research, consulting organizations. And so they published a series of books called Strength Finders. And they eventually did one that was called Strength-Based Leadership, or something along that line. But it's a bit older. These came out probably anywhere from 10 to 15 years ago, and been kind of coming out in different series and everything. But excellent books, excellent, easy reads as well. And the great thing is that because Gallup is so large, so vast, they've done so much research, so they have a lot of data behind that, which I think really kind of supports the theories and the ideas that they're putting forth. One of the things that I think to keep in mind is that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and that's just the reality, right? We all do have that. So being aware of both your strengths so you can leverage those things, and then your weaknesses so you can make sure that you're managing those appropriately to be successful. I think one of the problems oftentimes that a lot of companies, a lot of leaders get into is that they focus so heavily on not only their own but their team and other people's weaknesses, and they're trying to bring those up and focus on those, and really that strength becomes kind of undermined and undervalued, and it can feel very defeating if you're always just trying to work on this weakness, because the reality is you're only going to get so far, since it's just kind of an inherent weakness.
Yeah, no, you're right. As we've been talking and preparing for this, I keep looking at my own strengths and weaknesses, and then I'm looking at my teams, their strengths and weaknesses, and where do I want to apply my focus? I think probably the #1 most important skill in this topic is self-awareness, right? We have to be aware of our strengths and of our weaknesses. And I don't think that's too hard to figure out. Spending a few minutes of quiet time where you're just thinking about, what am I really good at? What have people complimented me on in the past? Where do I find my passion in my work? What are the specific tasks that I enjoy doing? And then weaknesses, those come pretty quick too, because often they're pointed out, right? As leaders, as managers, we point out our team's weaknesses, 3 times to 1 strength, when it should be the opposite.
Right.
3 strengths to one weakness. Speaking of Gallup, I read some stats on leaders who are actively focused on their strengths are actually 12% more productive, and even more, they're 6 times more engaged than their peers. And I thought that was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, there's substantial research that indicates that, companies and leaders who leverage strengths improve production, quality of work, customer staff experience. So, I mean, it's a good focus to try to figure out. And like you said, whether it be as an individual or you're trying to figure out your own, or where I would encourage, especially from a leadership standpoint, is get really good at helping other people discover what their strengths are too, pointing those things out, and not so much just always pointing out the weaknesses, but really trying to hone in on what those people are bringing to the table that's unique and interesting, because that's going to make them feel valued and like they have purpose, and that's something they can really sharpen.
No, you bring up a good point. When you're as a leader, if you're focusing on your team's strengths, this comes from Gallup again. There's a 70% variance in team engagement that's directly related to leadership that is focused on their team's strengths, strength-based leadership. So I found that really interesting, and that there's 15% lower turnover rates with those same teams.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously tons of value as far as the research shows that focusing on strengths and making sure that you're evaluating those things and bringing those things to light and creating that kind of strength-based leadership culture, is going to be better for your team and your organization in general.
Yeah.
One of the questions that Gallup asked, and this is kind of how they got to this whole Strength Finders thing, was they asked, at work, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? And so it was something like 1.7 million employees. Yeah. So at work, do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? At 1.7 million employees and 101 companies across 63 countries. So, vast worldwide, kind of only 20% indicated that they feel that their strengths are in play every day.
I actually thought that number would have been lower.
Yeah, but still, that means 80% of employees feel like their strengths aren't even being utilized, which is it's really unfortunate.
Sad. It's like, as a leader, your job is to unleash that talent, like a zipper, unzipping, letting that talent be unleashed. And if you're not doing that in your organization, you're missing out on just tremendous opportunity to bring the best out of people and to grow together.
So there's an example that I've shared previously, and that kind of really to help this all kind of resonate. Again, what happens is, I think that people are fixated on, or we all get fixated on, those weaknesses and those problems, those challenges, those development opportunities, whatever you want to call them. And we focus so heavily on those things and neglect the strengths that people have. And that can really just make it for a difficult time for both the employee and the leader. So an example, I had taken over a team, and this was kind of a team of different team leads, in a sense, where they kind of were, a higher level beyond the frontline staff. And I was trying to assess, what are the different things that they're doing. And one person, what have they been working on? What is their focus, that kind of thing. And so they had one person who, so this team was tasked with doing a lot of trainings and presentations of any new information. And there was this one person who she indicated that she was not good at public speaking. She didn't like it. She didn't enjoy it at all. And their approach with the previous leader and their kind of approach as a team was to take this person, and for every single training, every single presentation that they were asked to do as a team, they put her in front so she could get practice.
Wow.
And she improved.
It sounds like a good idea on the surface.
It does, but the reality was she was miserable. She didn't enjoy her work. She was getting practice, yes, and she improved a little bit, right? The needle moved a little bit, but what instead the team was presenting themselves as a team, a collective, poorly, right? Like they had
Yeah.
basically found their worst person on the team to be the presenter. They had some people on there who were outstanding presenters, who were
Mm,
great in front of a group, great in front of a crowd. And what she was really good at some of the back end research and kind of creating some of the content. So creating the PowerPoints and all that stuff, the slide decks, and everything. So she enjoyed that kind of thing. So instead, what we did is we flipped it. She started to actually create this material. We had people who really did enjoy and were really good at and talented at speaking in front of groups, and got that's how they got their energy from. And we had them be the presenters, and she kind of helped create some of the content in the background, and worked perfectly. She loved coming back to work. She, really enjoyed
yeah.
her job because she felt valued instead of feeling defeated constantly.
That is such a great example for everyone, all of us to learn from, especially myself. It's she acknowledged that was a weakness, and it's
Yeah,
not, and it's not one that she wants to work on. Like, she's comfortable on the back end, doing all the reporting and the research and the PowerPoints, something she excels at. And she found her seat on the bus, so to speak.
right,
Right.
right.
So I want to explore weaknesses for a minute, because, again, I think self-awareness is key, right? We all have weaknesses, we all have strengths, but that self-awareness is important. And I think many people struggle admitting their weakness, or weaknesses, right? Like, you want to put your best foot forward. You don't want your boss to know that you're not very good at Excel or PowerPoint or public speaking. And so, I'm curious, why do you think that is? Why is there that fear of admitting or addressing your own weakness?
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, nobody wants to appear weak, or it's. I think we're taught to oftentimes hide our, our challenges or our weaknesses, that kind of thing, and or even try to play up those things and pretend like we're good at those things when we're not. Um, and I will say too, the book series in Strength Finders, they do a much better job of articulating this. But the oftentimes what happens is a weakness is just the opposite of an opposing strength. So an
Mm,
example, and I'll give you kind of an example of why it's important to identify this, so that you, and again, it's not that you're necessarily going to all of a sudden become this great person in this, or you're going to turn a weakness into a strength. It's that you understand it enough and are aware of enough how to manage that going forward to be successful. And then you can really focus your attention on your strengths and sharpening those things, and making, that's just going to bring you so much more return on investment. Um,
yeah.
so one of the examples that is pertains particularly to me. So some of the strengths that I have, I tend to be kind of more of an innovative, kind of out of the box thinker. I like to brainstorm, that kind of thing, and be creative. Big picture kind of thinking. Um, the kind of opposing component to that, though, is that I also can be, less organized, less detail oriented. So I'm in the clouds, and not so much in the weeds.
Yeah.
And I can kind of lose track of time and that kind of thing, um, versus other people who have a strength with tasks and organization and process, and really being kind of, again, organized and time specific, and following that. And those people, they tend to struggle sometimes with big picture thinking, or thinking outside of the box, because they are so, kind of more, diligent and regimented in their work.
Yeah.
the but the reality is, if you take those two individuals and you make sure that they both understand the value of each other, and you partner them together, you can have an amazing team, right? So I can sit there and I can challenge that person who might be, much more in the box kind of thinking, and much more organized and task oriented. I can challenge them to let's think bigger picture, or let's be more creative. At the same time, they can tell that person can also help me or tell me to shut the hell up, and you know and let's move forward. Okay, enough of this, kind of wandering on, and we need to get focused, Ian. And but if you both value each other, you can again have an amazing team. So I understand the idea of why people hide their weaknesses, but there's so much value in just being proud of your strengths,
Yeah.
and at the same time then just knowing how and being aware, and knowing how to manage your weakness.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the worst things is to be unaware of your weaknesses, right? Or weakness, and you think it's a strength. So that's also a problem that I think we all face from time to time.
For sure.
And so that going back to that self-awareness, like, what am I good at? What are my strengths? What versus my weaknesses? I like the story that you shared. I had a manager that worked for me, a few different companies together, and fun story. I reported to him, and like 4 months working for him, he's like, "You're gonna be my boss one day," and then like 2 years later, I was his boss, which is fun. But he's a fantastic guy, and I'm always like coming up with these big, grandiose ideas, and he would always bring me back down to earth. He'd say, "Steven, that's great. I get the idea, but here's reality. Let's work on this realm of reality, and we can kind of reach towards that big vision. But let's not get out of control here." He'd always bring me back down to earth, which was a great compliment for me.
Yeah,
This was a perfect match.
absolutely. You need that, and I think that's the bigger concept with something like a strength-based leadership approach, is that it's not about having a team of superstars, where every team member is amazing at everything, right?
Right.
It's about each member feeling valued and having something that they are uniquely bringing to the team, that can make you as a collective more successful, and that's going to influence your team's motivation and their will and their inspiration and all of that kind of stuff. So I feel like um, it's just so helpful to make sure that you are valuing each member by identifying their strengths,
Yeah.
and then when they feel value, right, it's so much easier to also feel comfortable in talking about weaknesses or providing feedback and opportunities to
Yeah.
improve.
You're spot on. We have to be open about our weaknesses. As leaders, we have to be open about our own weaknesses. We have to share openly with our team members, things that we recognize as strengths and weaknesses. And it doesn't have to be a negative conversation. It's just, hey, you have a problem with your head in the clouds, Ian, all the time, big picture.
Sure.
But that let's bring it back down to earth sometimes.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, and that I think understand taking that, then it's much easier for me to also, if you value that I do bring the big picture component, it's much easier for me to also receive that feedback that I need to lay off it a little bit too, and get focused and understand that, versus if you just tell me that here's all your weaknesses, here's all the things that you're doing wrong, and that's it, then I don't feel
You don't
valued,
feel
and then
valued.
that's yeah, and then that just
Yeah.
becomes a bigger challenge.
Another thing I want to note when it comes to weaknesses is sometimes a weakness can be a strength, and a
Mm-hmm.
strength can be a weakness.
Sure.
It's the utility, right? For me, sometimes when I've got a big challenge ahead of me, a big task, a big goal, I tend to just kind of like block out the rest of the world, and I am 100% dedicated and focused on that specific challenge or task or goal, and I'm giving it 110%, 110 hours a week, like just going at it right until I accomplish what I set out to accomplish. And yes, that's good because I'm getting something done much quicker than if I was just to be working on everything else. But also on the other side of the coin, I'm letting things fall into the cracks, other tasks, other responsibilities I have to my people and their well-being is being forgotten for that short period of time. And so I may get ahead on this task, but also I'm in the same time getting behind on these others. And so we have to find that balance on, sometimes a strength can be a weakness and sometimes a weakness can be a strength. And it goes back to that self-awareness. We have to be aware of that.
Absolutely. And that's really the thing, is that the strength oftentimes, or the weakness, is the opposing kind of opposite of the strength, right? So the strength is that you can get hyper focused, which is great, but also then the weakness is that you're not broadly focused, and on all the various tasks, and keeping apprised of all those different things. So, yeah, I mean, it's just, that's kind of the interesting thing, is once you figure out what your strengths are and really understand them, you can just think about, on the flip side, what's that impact that also has, and that oftentimes can lead you to your weakness, or vice versa. If you're really aware of your weakness, if somebody's maybe brought that to your attention, how is that also a strength? And so, oftentimes those two things are opposing kind of elements. I would say, I think and you kind of touched on this, but I wanted to share some thoughts, and you probably have some
Please go
resources
ahead.
too, on how to discover your strengths. So, and I know you kind of shared some of these things, but the general questions, when you're thinking about what your strengths are, or what your team's strengths are, and I highly encourage anybody who does have direct reports, to spend some time asking them and engaging with them, and getting them to kind of think about these things too, and help them identify their strengths, because it can just be, again, a really motivating, purpose-driven kind of discussion. But typically a strength is something that you enjoy. So something you enjoy, something you usually find easy, and you're actually kind of surprised when others don't excel as you do in this area, right? So it's just something that kind of comes more natural almost. And those are two kind of the really big things, and when you identify those things, then it becomes easier, because you can be proud of those strengths, and then again, be brave enough to recognize and admit that you have some weaknesses on the other side too.
Yeah. That's, you have to evaluate I love the comment you made. If it comes easy to you and you're surprised that it's not so easy for others, I look at some of my strengths, and in hindsight, it's like, wow, that was a little bit easier than I thought. Maybe that is a strength. Maybe I need to go back and improve that strength even more.
And that's why also, I mean, I think on the other side of that too, some people will get frustrated, right? That, like, you might even get frustrated that people aren't demonstrating this, or aren't getting this, or it's not as easy, it's hard for them. And that's because that's your strength and that's not theirs, right? And so it's just understanding that people have different strengths, I think allowing for that, and again, you're wanting to identify those strengths so people can sharpen those things. The opposite term from, we talk about, like, kind of sharpening your skills or your strengths. Unfortunately, a lot of times what we also would talk about too is we want to be well-rounded, right? And those two
Right.
things are opposite of each other. We should, instead of being well-rounded and just smoothing out all the strengths and trying to bring up all the weaknesses, instead, it's going to be much more productive, again, a better return on investment, if you, again, just know how to manage your weaknesses enough to be successful, and then really put a lot more time and energy into your strengths, and leveraging those things.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, you need a grade school education on your weaknesses.
Yes,
You need enough to kind of get around, right, and not cause too much trouble or damage. But then you need a PhD on your strengths, right?
absolutely. And it's gonna be, I mean, so much more enjoyable as well. Like, that's the other thing. Again, that team member that I was referring to about the presentation skills. Again, they just they just didn't like public speaking, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, at some point you do have to be able to communicate at some level, but forcing yourself, to do something that you don't enjoy is just going to be miserable for everyone.
Yeah. I want to make one more point on weaknesses.
Yes.
So there's a stat out there. I believe it's from the Hay Group. It showed in their study that leaders who acknowledge their weaknesses are 32% more likely to have high performing teams.
Wow.
And I've always appreciated, people, my leaders that I've looked up to and worked for, when they acknowledge their weaknesses publicly and they talk about it.
Yeah.
And it gives me permission to do the same.
Absolutely. And this is kind of goes back to what we were talking about, in the previous podcast last week about accountability, and just the idea of, owning your own mistakes as well as your own successes, and creating that culture and that environment where you own, this is how I perform, this is what I'm great at, and this is what I'm not great at. And it's understanding that across the board, for not only yourself as a leader, but for your team, and creating that kind of culture. I mean, a lot of leadership is actually leading by demonstration,
That's right.
and by example. So, if you are that person who is owning that, there's going to be a lot more psychological safety for others and trust for others to feel it's okay to also have weaknesses and to share those things.
Yeah. I want to hit on one more thing here before we continue to move on. If you're a leader of a team, you quickly understand your team's strengths and weaknesses at an individual contributor level. This associate Ian's really good at big picture, and Steven over here is really good at getting in the weeds. And so, you need to be able to take those two and put them together, right? You need to leverage their strengths, and that's how you can build a high performance team. If I have someone on my team that's not very good at technology, but phenomenal at selling, and then I have someone that's really good at technology and okay at selling, it's like, let's bring you two together. Maybe you can help the salesperson with all of their paperwork so it doesn't pull them down, and they have the ability to bring on more business. And now this person who didn't really love selling that much is now loving like how fast and efficient they can be at processing the paperwork. Like, it's a good match.
Yeah. And unfortunately, the research again shows that most organizations, most leaders are doing it the opposite. They're doing it the wrong way. They are basically identifying. So this person who isn't good at sales, they are constantly, talking to them and training them and working on improving their sales to get them up to this other person who's exceptional at it to try to somehow, and they're never going to be right. That person has some natural ability to be exceptional in that area.
Yeah.
This other person who really just loves and gets and understands the complexity of technology, that's just something that is their strength and their love, and something they enjoy doing. And you're never going to get that person who is not great at that technology piece, who's the great salesperson, to somehow fall in love with technology. It's just
Right.
And unfortunately, a lot of managers invest a lot of effort, and a lot of businesses, companies, spend a lot of time focusing on these weaknesses and trying to get people up to beyond where they need to be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll take that salesperson that is just phenomenal, but terrible at paperwork, over a salesperson that's okay at sales and pretty good at paperwork. Like, I'll take the one that can't do any of the paperwork 9 times or 10 out of 10 times. Right.
Yeah.
So there was a case study I wanted to bring up.
Mhm.
This was on, this is just a standout example. This was CEO of Microsoft. I can't say his first name, Satya Nadella. But he took over Microsoft in 2014. And at that point, they were really losing that edge. And he recognized that his strengths were really not on that technology edge, but in empathy and team building, finding the right people. And so he didn't like the competitiveness of Microsoft. He wanted to kind of pull that back and focus more on empathy, focus on people's strengths. And he built this incredible leadership team through his vision of empathy and having the right people in the right seat. And he really helped them transition the market where they were only doing 300 billion annually in 2014 to 2.5 billion annually.
Wow.
And so that shows taking that approach of focusing on the strengths of your team, being compassionate i.e. empathy for people's weaknesses, can make a huge difference in your business.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, I mean, imagine how these people are feeling if you're in this, highly competitive kind of environment or culture. Yes, it does breed some like the competition can breed some higher performance, but it's only enough to beat your competitor, right? You just need to be good enough to beat your competitor versus if you are collaboratively working together, and everyone's valued for their strengths, there's no limit to how far you're going to go with your strengths and how far you're going to push yourself, because it's not about I just need to get one step further than my competitor, internal competitor.
Yeah.
I'm going to go I enjoy this and I'm valued for it and this is my purpose. I'm going to go as high as I possibly can. And I think that's what, companies who do leverage strengths well and understand that, that's why they excel so well. And it's seen, in the profits and in the retention of staff and all those.
That's right. Yeah, it's pretty clear that the data is clear on this. And we just have to be more self-aware of this. And I think there's a lot of leaders that are very data driven. Like I'm data driven. Like give me an Excel spreadsheet and it's like, yay, I'm so excited. Right. I wasn't like that before, but that was a strength I found over time.
Nice.
And so, I think leaders that are data driven really need to understand how they can improve their strengths and recognize their weaknesses. And so I would recommend Clifton Strengths Assessment. That's a really good assessment. I've taken that one. There's another powerful tool called 360 degree feedback. I think it was something like that. But those that took these assessments saw a 30% improvement in their overall effectiveness just in 1 year.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, just having that awareness, and then being able to focus on those things, I think is so important. There's a self-assessment test tool that I've referred people to because the Clifton strengths, the Gallup and Clifton strength finders, usually if you purchase one of their books,
You get the assessment.
you get the assessment kind of thing. I can't remember, how much it is, but you can find it because they're so old and they've been out for a while. I mean, you can find, a used book for relatively.
You could probably ask AI to like replicate a Clifton strengths assessment and it'd likely be spot on.
I imagine they're probably even out there already, but there's one that's free that's relatively easy and simple and it gives some great results that I like. It's called the High Five test. And so it's
I've heard of that.
it's HIGH and then the number 5 test.com. And it's free. They have a free test. It doesn't take too long, and it's just that taking that and maybe even have your team or your peers, take these kind of tests and come together and discuss that. I mean, I think it's so valuable for people to again be able to appreciate and discover what not only in themselves what might be there, but what other people bring to the table. I will say too, I think a lot in my experience in leadership, a lot of people don't know what their strengths are. They've heard, like you said, they've heard quite often what their weaknesses are or things that they're not doing well at, but no one's talking to them about their strengths and they haven't really invested in that. So if you can help somebody find that, man, you will get somebody who is committed to you and that organization. and with
And
purpose.
have your whole team take it too, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
Take it yourself, share your findings with your team, and then and share your aha moments and what you want to work on now moving forward, and then challenge your team to do the same.
yeah. And then the next discussion is then, okay, how do we leverage these things? You know, how do we partner people up? How do we, you know, and here's the thing too. I think as you're having that discussion, it can be a good starting place, but people may not, you know, some of the words may be kind of strange or weird, or they may not really identify with it. So having them figure out, okay, what do I enjoy? You know, do I enjoy technology, or do I enjoy talking to people? You know, do I enjoy selling, that kind of thing? Do I enjoy Excel spreadsheets? You know, if you do, then that can be those things where then you can start to really again leverage those potential strengths.
Yeah. I want to talk briefly about some common leadership pitfalls related to strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, I've had my own mistakes. I've had leaders, that focus too much on weaknesses, addressing those as critical issues versus strengths. There was a Forbes study that was done with a group of executives, and 61% of executives felt that they had this over reliance on failure to, or what let me, sorry, I was going off of memory here. Let me just read it. 61% of executives felt that over reliance on strengths led to a failure to address critical weaknesses, which can cause team imbalances. Another trap is the heroic leader mindset, where leaders think they must excel in every area instead of successful leaders adopting a collaborative leadership style.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge is, especially a leader. Most people in general, but particularly leaders, are not comfortable with sharing that they have a weakness or a challenge, or whatever you want to refer to, and that they have to be great at everything. And that's just an unrealistic expectation for themselves and for their teams. And you shouldn't be creating, if you're creating that for yourself, that inevitably is going to roll out to everyone else too. So
Yeah.
I love that, you know, that idea, or unfortunately that's a common challenge. But I mean, that's really where, if you can just get out of your own head that you need to be perfect or great or strong at everything. You know, the person who says that they're strong at everything, or they don't have a weakness, or that silly one that, you know, the one that everybody uses now in their interviews is, my greatest weakness is that I'm perfect at, or my biggest weakness is I'm perfect at everything.
That's my answer every time to that question. I really like this comment on LinkedIn. So if those of you that are watching LinkedIn Live, if you're on Spotify, you can watch the video. I'll read it for those that are listening in. So Cassandra, she actually is one of my salespeople that works for me. She's
Nice.
phenomenal, awesome. And I love that she's being vulnerable here and commenting live on LinkedIn. So she put, sometimes our biggest hurdles are the ones we create for ourselves. I've often found myself being a victim of my own thoughts, especially when it comes to addressing perceived weaknesses. Just when I'm about to make a sell or take on a new challenge, doubts creep in, and I find myself wrestling with my confidence. And then she writes, but the right kind of leadership can make all the difference. I think that is a really neat comment from Cassandra. Thank you.
Yeah,
And I think we're all guilty of that.
absolutely. I mean, I think
Creep in.
doubts. I mean, that's just unavoidable, and that's there's a whole nother aspect of psychology and stuff we could get into, about, you know, doubts. But in general, I mean, I think, and you kind of even talked about this, you know, at the top of the conversation was, you know, the imposter syndrome, and doubting
Right.
yourself and all of that kind of stuff. But again, if you have your own strengths that you're aware of, that other people are aware of and they value, that can help bring your confidence up. And again, maybe I'm not going to be, you know, I'm not, you know, if I'm not great at technology, I probably shouldn't be the first person that jumps up and tries to help out with technology, right? I should let
Right.
this, you know, I should let Steven take this on, kind of thing. Uh, but I am good at this other thing, whatever it may be. I am good at these sales, and this is what's going to be, my kind of selling point, is that I'm leveraging this strength well.
Yeah.
But I think this, again, talking about strengths with your team, again, can really help bring value to your team and to those individuals and help boost their confidence.
100%. I think, just kind of closing this up a little bit,
Yeah.
when it comes to leadership development, you really want to look at ways that can emphasize strengths and weaknesses. We're not saying to improve your weaknesses, but to emphasize that, hey, you have both,
Mhm.
and you need to acknowledge those, and maybe have a grade level education on your weaknesses, but have that PhD on your strengths.
Yeah.
I think organizations should invest in coaching and mentoring for their leaders. I think that's often missed. You just assume people are working on themselves and they're feeding themselves the knowledge that they need. But that's something we do here. The company I'm part of is we've invested in mentors. We've invested in professional coaching to help improve our strengths and to
Mhm.
acknowledge our weaknesses and be able to find those people that can complement those weaknesses.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, man. Great discussion for sure. Again, the main thing is just helping people feel valued, and you do that by helping them identify their unique strengths and leveraging those on a routine basis. I think can really change the game.
It does. And I go back to that self-awareness. But also one thing I meant to mention with that self-awareness is embrace that authenticity of of yourself. Be your best self.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's all you can be. Or at the end of the day, that's who you are. And that, I will say too, in Strength Finder's book and a lot of the psychology, I mean, a lot of these things that these kind of core behaviors that we've developed. I mean, they are. You can change certain things, but there's a lot of things that are just how we operate and how we perform, and a lot of the strengths that we have are a result of that. And so, it's much easier, and you're going to be much more successful if you embrace those things, both strengths and weaknesses, and use them appropriately.
Well said. No leader is perfect. No person is perfect.
No.
And that's okay. You recognize your strengths. More importantly, you get comfortable in acknowledging your weaknesses, and then you build a team that complements you.
Yeah.
We have to remind ourselves as leaders that leadership is a journey of continuous learning. And as Peter Drucker, is that his name? Peter Drucker. He said, leadership is not about making speeches or being kind. Leadership is defined by results, not attributes. And so, embrace what your strengths are, acknowledge your weaknesses, and build that team that can complement those weaknesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, Ian.
Yes, Stephen.
What a fun topic.
It was good stuff, man. We had we dumped a lot on folks. Hopefully they were able to get something out of it.
I apologize. The LinkedIn comments were not syncing, so I know a lot of you left comments, but I want to challenge those that are listening or watching. Do a self-assessment. Check out High Five. Check out Strength Finders. Check out Standout 2.0, and assess your strengths, assess your weaknesses, and if you have a team that reports to you, after you've done that, have them do the same, and let's learn how we can complement each other, and the sky's the limit.
Absolutely.
All right. With that, a special message, a really entertaining video from our sponsors, quote unquote. Here we go. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Stephen. Bye, y'all.
6 months ago, I get a call from Steve Farrell, who wants to talk about partnering with Yes for our labor needs. It would
change your approach to staffing.
Change my approach to staffing?
We're short on employees. Again. So we're going to have to shut down a line. Sorry.
I told him I've already used multiple agencies and have had headaches with each one. So my approach to staffing is just fine.
With With multiple agencies, we thought we had our staffing needs covered.
I had negotiated a super low rate to save on labor costs.
And I could pursue my passions outside of work because I never had to stay overtime due to turnover, productivity, or training issues.
The agency sent quality people. Well, they sent people. Sometimes.
My love of language and lexicon languished.
I negotiated a super low rate.
Hey, the agency employees didn't show up, so we're short on staff again.
Bupkis. Curses. Fetch.
Hey, an agency sent an employee.
Do you have production experience?
I've produced YouTube videos. I'm hungry. When's my first break?
This is not sustainable. If you want happy customers and a healthy business, something's gotta change. So yes, we tried Yes.
Yes focuses on finding the right people for the right job.
Turnover is down, productivity is up.
Yes trains
Or onboards.
quality employees, ensuring they have the skills
Or proper work ethic.
our company needs to succeed.
Thrive.
Yes provides us with quality data so we don't have to juggle multiple agencies to fill our needs.
They could have doubled our rates.
No, they could not have.
Okay, maybe not doubled, but Yes's cost was cheaper in the end. They solved our problems, which were way more expensive than a few points on rate.
I'm just happy that Yes provides us with good people.
Great employees to fill our workflow gaps.
And Yes brings them fast.
Yes specializes in production, warehouse, manufacturing.
And I love that Yes focuses on workplace safety.
Yes also offers services like time clock and
Payroll services, forklift drivers, pickers, packers, general labor.
I like how Yes customizes their screenings to our needs.
I love that we've hired many Yes employees as
Short-term, direct hire, seasonal work, part-time, full-time,
and long-term members of our company.
I love partnering with Yes. No more gaps in production, and I can focus on efficiency without stressing about costs or people. Yes really has
revolutionized.
changed our approach to staffing. Our people are happy.
Your customers are happy.
And that makes me
Delirious.
happy.
Delighted.
Happy.
Thrilled.
Happy.
Cheerful. Gratified. Ecstatic.
Happy. He said happy.
Sunny. Jovial. Tickled.